Buttercup podcast where we talk about early childhood topics. Today, I have a very special guest from Ireland. I have Professor Emer Ring, and she's the Dean of the Early Childhood and Teacher Education at Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, Ireland. Professor Ring leads and manages one of the largest education faculties in Ireland, which provides a wide range of programs from early childhood to post-primary level at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. She is a lecturer in the areas of early years education, inclusion and education policy on the Bachelor of Arts in Early Childhood Care and Education, and the Bachelor of Education programs. Professor Ring's previous experience includes Head of Department of Reflective Pedagogy and Early Childhood Studies. She engages in and has led a wide range of national and international research in education related to early childhood, primary, post-primary, and special school contexts, including presenting at conferences and seminars and publishing widely. Professor Ring has also been District and Senior Department of Education Inspector with responsibility for inspection of education provision for children in the early years, primary, post-primary, and special school settings, with a particular focus on special education. Her teaching experience spans the role of early years education and shared teacher of children with special educational needs from 1981 to 2001. Professor Ring engages in supervision of students on practicum experiences and supervises a wide range of undergraduate and postgraduate research at the master's and Ph.D. levels. Professor Ring led the design, development, and evaluation of the multiple award-winning Leadership for Inclusion in the Early Years program, LINC. LINC is the acronym, focused on supporting inclusion in early childhood settings. She has extensive experience in the development of inclusion across the education system and has recently completed a publication for the National Council for Special Education focused on charting the development of special education in Ireland from 1922 to 2022. Yes, that's 100 years, and I can't wait to ask you about this. It's going to be so much fun talking about this big project. And other ones. Other publications include Leading Inclusion from the Inside Out, a handbook for parents and early childhood teachers in their early learning and care, primary and special school settings. Autism from the Inside Out, a handbook for parents, early childhood, primary, post-primary, and special school settings. And The Contemporary Relevance of John Dewey's Theories on Teaching and Learning, Deweyan Perspectives on Standardization, Accountability, and Assessment in Education. Together with Dr. Lisha O'Sullivan, Professor Ring is co-authoring a further publication for Peter Lang called Play from the Inside Out, a handbook for students, teachers, and parents, which is due for publication in 2024. Thank you for being here, Dr. Ring.
Thank you very much, Marissa, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It really is my pleasure to be here with you and to be invited to join and to chat with you on your podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much. How did you get started in the early education field?
Okay, so it's a long story, but as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be an elementary school teacher. We call it primary education, you call it elementary. And I was delighted when I completed your equivalent of high school to be offered a place on one of our teacher education programs in Dublin. So in Ireland, just to paint a little bit of the context for you, elementary teacher education programs prepare you for teaching children age 4 to 12. So during my time in college, we had a lot of supervised placement experiences, just like your students. And I knew when I finished, I wanted to continue to teach younger children. I knew that was where my heart was. So I was lucky enough to get my dream job in a 3-teacher rural school. So in Ireland, many of our schools are rural schools. And so there were 3 teachers teaching altogether 8 grades. And I was teaching 40 4 to 5-year-old children. So as I continued through my teaching career, I became more interested in young children who learned differently, because I really felt that some children learned despite of what I did, whereas others needed more support. And I knew that I needed to know more so that I could support children to achieve their full potential. So I went off to college and studied special education. And I caught the special education bug. So my special education journey was one with a lot of twists and turns. I completed first a diploma in special education, then a master's in special education in Dublin City University, and then a master's in autism. One master's wasn't enough, so I had to do another one at Birmingham University before completing my PhD, which is focused on special education in Dublin City University. Then I joined the school inspectorate. So in Ireland, maybe we have an inspectorate who are really in the ministry or in the Department of Education, who provide an evaluative role, who have an evaluative role in schools. So they evaluate, but also they provide advice. So I worked as an inspector for 10 years. And in 2011 here, I joined as head of Department of Reflective Pedagogy and Early Childhood Studies. So another dream job. And then in 2019, I was appointed Dean of Early Childhood and Teacher Education. So I suppose I have been very fortunate really to be able to be involved and to continue to be involved in early childhood education, and to be in that very privileged position to be able to view it through all of the lenses as a teacher, as an inspector and an evaluator, now as an academic, and an academic in terms of lecturing and supporting students, but also in engaging in a lot of research, because we have a fundamental belief here at Mary Immaculate College that all our practice must be informed by research. And that is something we really try to instill in our students from the get-go. But we might talk about that as well further in the conversation. So that's how I got to where I am today. It's been a long journey, but every minute of it I have enjoyed.
That is amazing. And my students watch this podcast or listen to the podcast, and I love your story and where you've been, and now you're the dean of Mary Immaculate College. You're like the boss of the whole college, and you're one of the biggest programs in Ireland. And it's just so exciting to hear from people like you, how your career has evolved. And there's like your story shows, there's so many different things you can do in early childhood education, and your specialty areas, how you have more than one master's degree, one in autism, and your background in special education is just incredible. Well, what does early childhood special education look like in Ireland?
Okay, so I suppose for many years, and I think it's the same all over the world, I'm familiar with your system in the United States and in Europe also, early childhood education didn't receive the attention it needed. And this, in Ireland, we have a particular historical legacy from when Ireland was governed by Great Britain, and children started elementary school when they were 4. And this was very much to do with the Industrial Revolution, actually, because at that point, policymakers, they wanted children to start school early so that they would leave early and then be available to work in the factories and so on. So this continued in Ireland once we even got our independence in 1922. So we've just 100 years of independence now. And it continued. The children, like when I was teaching, children came to school actually even before 4, it would be 3 to formal elementary schooling. And it continued really until influenced by global developments and research highlighting the critical importance, as we know, of high quality early childhood education. So in 2010 in Ireland, a free preschool year was introduced for children, and then in September 2016, a second free preschool year was introduced. Now, this free preschool year is for children from aged 3 years, 2 months and 4 years, 7 months before they start school in Ireland. Because the context in Ireland is that the majority really of, we call them early learning and care settings. I know you may call them early childhood settings, or preschools are predominantly privately owned. So it's only very recently really that the government has come in and provided support for parents in terms of supporting children in the very early years. So apart from subsidies to early learning and care centres in areas of socio-economic disadvantage, parents really had to fund their own children's early childhood experiences. However, as you really, we have kind of moved now to this more universal childcare subsidy, which was introduced, and in September 2017 for children from 0 to 36 months. So now there's a universal childcare subsidy to support parents in supporting children from the earliest years. So you asked me that it's about special education in particular. So in 2015, the Better Start Access and Inclusion model was launched by the government. And this was because really the government was very concerned that young children who may have additional needs were not being targeted from the get-go. And as your students all know, Marisa, early intervention is critical. The earlier we get in, the better chance children have, and the better we can support them. So in 2015, this access and inclusion model, which we call the AIM model, was launched in Ireland. And it's described as a child and parent-centred model. And what it does really is it rejects this diagnostic approach or labeling a child. So it maintains a focus on a child's developmental level, functional ability and needs, and incorporates graduated, you'll be familiar with this, graduated levels of support from universal to targeted supports. And preschool settings can avail of support that they need to ensure that they can support and they can enable children to achieve their potential from the earliest time. So here in the college, you mentioned the LINC program. As part of this access and inclusion model, we here in the college were lucky enough to get a tender to develop the Leadership for Inclusion in the Early Years program. And this is part of the access and inclusion model. And what we do is every year we have up to 650 early childhood teachers on this program. It's a blended program. They're early childhood teachers in practice, and we focus on supporting teachers to cultivate inclusive culture, inclusive pedagogy, and inclusive practice. Now, a lot of people ask, what is pedagogy? Can you actually tell me what pedagogy means? Well, pedagogy is simply the way you teach. And the way we all teach is underpinned by our own beliefs, first of all, by our own experiences, and certainly about the philosophers and the research that we all kind of lean towards. And everybody leans towards, I suppose, different philosophers, different researchers. So that for our students and for our early childhood teachers, we focus on this idea of pedagogy, that we all have our own individual pedagogy, but critically, whatever our pedagogy is, we do need to be able to defend it, and it needs to be located in empirical research and in research about how children learn and development. So look, we're very proud of this LINC program. It has won numerous awards and been nominated for international awards as well. And we continue to evaluate the program and believe it is making a real difference in the lives of so many early childhood teachers, children and families. And if your students get a chance, if you visit linkprogram.ie, you can read all about the program, and hopefully you'll agree with me also. So I suppose the short answer to your question, Marisa, is we have come a long way in terms of how we have developed our early childhood provision for children before they attend elementary school. We still have some way to go. I think the fact that children have 2 free preschool years now, and that there's a subsidy for younger children, we've made huge progress in that respect. And also the access and inclusion model now is providing that universal and targeted support for those children who need it. So that's it in a nutshell, really, where early childhood education is in Ireland in terms of special education. I think I'm not hearing you, Marisa. Maybe is your microphone on there?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly. We've all been that person. I think you're on mute.
Somebody has to say it. Just happened to me.
Yeah.
Emer, you'll never believe what just happened to me. So I'm recording this podcast from home, and the power went out. So
oh my God!
I'm calling you back from my iPhone, and I think it's still recording, but I'm not 100% sure.
All right, that's okay.
should we talk just a little bit more and then see if it works?
Yeah, we can. Maybe will I go back? I'll go back and talk about the early childhood education in Ireland and special education in Ireland, where that's at, maybe, so that we have the answer to that question. So I suppose, just like many other countries, early childhood education didn't receive the attention it needed until very recently. And I suppose what has kind of cast a light on early childhood education is the fact that there are researchers like you, Marissa, and like your students that are convincing policymakers that early childhood matters, and we know how important it is for children's early learning and development, and indeed for their lifelong chances and their lifelong development. So just in Ireland, there's a particular context which stems from a historical legacy that we were governed by Great Britain up until 1922. And for historical reasons, children who started school at 4, because in Great Britain, the policy was really that children would start school early so they could leave early, and then they were available to work during the Industrial Revolution in factories and so on. So this continued for much of the century here, up until very recently here in Ireland, where we have now a free preschool year from 2010, 1 free preschool year for children before they start school. And now we actually have 2 free preschool years for children before they start school, in addition to some support for parents for very younger children as well. But I suppose in Ireland, and I know this is similar in other countries as well, but in particular in Ireland, early childhood education is not state controlled, it's privately run by private providers. So the state is coming in terms of providing subsidies to support parents. And also the state is coming in very much in terms of the qualifications that are necessary. And I'll talk about this later in the conversation for early childhood teachers. So it's a very exciting time, is what I'm saying, in early childhood in Ireland. In relation to special education, again, in 2015, the Better Start Access and Inclusion model was launched by the government. And this really is what we call the A model. So it constitutes universal and targeted support for early childhood educators to support children who may require early intervention, who may require more targeted support from the outset. And this contains a whole lot of different supports, as well as continuing professional learning. And that's where our Leadership for Inclusion in the Early Years program is, the LINC program that you mentioned, Marissa, and that really supports existing early childhood teachers to provide for inclusive culture, inclusive practice, and inclusive pedagogy in their settings. So if your students are interested in the LINC program, if you go to linkprogram.ie, you can read all about it. And we're continuing to evaluate the program. And we really believe it's making a huge difference in terms of preparing early childhood teachers to be able to support children who have additional needs, who learn differently, and their families in early years education. I think your microphone, is your microphone on mute, Marissa?
Can you hear me now?
I can indeed. Yes, I can. How are we doing?
Thank you, Dr. Ring. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing about inclusion. And one of the things that I was so excited last spring to do with you was the work on John Dewey. And do you want to talk a little bit about your work with Dewey and Deweyan Perspectives and how that fits with education and young children?
I would love to, because anytime anyone asks me to talk about John Dewey, I am very happy to talk about John Dewey, because he is one of my heroes. I think I mentioned about pedagogy early on. What is pedagogy? And pedagogy is how we teach, and it's influenced by our beliefs about how children learn and develop, our own experiences, and those who have been our key, we'll use the word, influencers. And for me, John Dewey is right up there. So as we all know, John Dewey is an American philosopher, and he has very much influenced the Irish education system, actually. And as we know, he has an awful lot to say about how young children learn and development. And I suppose his influence has been profound in terms of curriculum, in terms of pedagogy and assessment here in Ireland and all over the world as well. And I think he's very linked. He was a contemporary, but I don't know whether they ever met, of Maria Montessori. And we know that he was very concerned that children play an active role in their own learning, and that this model of the transmission of knowledge, that we needed to really reflect on how effective that was going to be. And I love that he identified that the aim of education was the development of individuals to their utmost potential, informed by a knowledge of how children develop. And I think that's a really important message in these days of standardization, accountability. Are we really ensuring, are we really thinking about how we are developing children to their utmost potential? And I love also what he said about the child being the starting point, the center, and the end. I mean, how powerful is that? And I think we need to remember also that, you know, it can be confused sometimes, and people say about Dewey, oh, you know, he was in favor of unrestrained individuality. Well, he was not in favor of unrestrained individuality. He certainly believed that the teacher had a role as a co-constructor of knowledge with the child. So I'm sure kind of almost like Vygotsky, really, in so many ways, and his view of pedagogy as an evolving concept. And that's what makes early childhood education so exciting, because we know every day our pedagogy is evolving. And his linking of the concept, of course, of democracy to pedagogy are key messages for all of us, really, in deepening our knowledge of how young children learn. And I think how important is the concept of democracy for education in the world that we're living in now. And there's no one like young children who really do understand that concept of democracy. And I think that's, for me, so exciting about Dewey. But I'll stop now, because we could do the whole podcast on Dewey.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I'm just curious, and you talked about the past and the past 100 years, and right now we're living in historical times with the global pandemic. What has the global pandemic been like for you in Ireland?
Yeah, you know, I suppose there's the global pandemic in some ways brought us all together, you know, it brought the global community together, because I think we were all experiencing, you know, those lockdowns, the anxiety, the uncertainty, and I suppose the loneliness for so many people. And again, for young children, the opportunities for play, and as we know, the power of play were really curtailed, because of course everyone was so anxious, and we really didn't know. And it was, I suppose, that sense of not knowing. And it was really a great time, Marissa, of suffering and distress. But out of all of that, I think if there is any positivity to be gleaned from what the world experienced, it was the greater public visibility and awareness provided by the pandemic for education, and in particular early childhood education. I don't know how many parents have said to me, oh, I don't know how the teacher copes. I don't know how the early years educator copes in terms of children, you know, the parents were at home all day trying to support your children, trying to support their learning, engaging with digital platforms and so on. So there has been a dawning realization, Marissa, I think, that teaching is very complex, and it's a multifaceted endeavor that we all know requires a sophisticated knowledge base and skill set. And I really believe that this is not always understood. So I think, you know, this concept of sure anybody can be a teacher, we know now that that's not true. And I actually think that the pandemic, in a sense, did us a favor by highlighting that. So I think we should build now on this momentum, and I think we should harness this thinking. And how do we do that? I think we know, and this is something that really, I suppose, exercises me in terms of our students here in the college, the professionalization of early childhood education. It is really critical in terms of providing parity of pay and working conditions with teachers at elementary and middle and high school levels, because we don't have that here in Ireland. And it's something that we advocate a lot for here in the college, both our lecturing colleagues and our students themselves. So I think it's time for all of us to highlight the importance of early childhood education for the future of our children and our society. And I think that is a lesson really that we need to take with us from the COVID-19 pandemic and not forget.
Yes, that is a great lesson.
Mm.
And that was interesting to hear what it was like in Ireland too.
And if you were to write a headline about early childhood education, what would be like the big news of the day today?
Okay, I'm good. This is going to be very easy for me because it's only 3 words, Marissa, and it's interactions drive development. And I'll tell you where that came from. It wasn't me, but it's so powerful. And I attended a presentation by Professor Edward Melhuish from the University of Oxford, and he was in Dublin a number of years ago. And if your students are familiar with the work of Ed Melhuish, you know that he's been involved in a lot of longitudinal research, in particular in the UK. And he distilled down all of the messages from his extensive research into 3 words: interactions drive development. And we hear about relational pedagogy here. Now, that's a new buzzword here in Ireland. I don't know whether it's something you're hearing about in the United States, but really all pedagogy, as we know as early childhood educators, must be relational. And we must always be conscious of the interactions that we have with children, and that they should all be focused on driving development. So I think early childhood education should be flying that flag for interactions drive development, because as early educators, we know this. And I think it's really important that we focus on the quality of those interactions, because without those interactions being of a high quality, without being empathetic, without understanding where children are come from, without having the belief in what we do, then I don't believe we're going to achieve the outcomes that we really want to achieve. So there you go. Interactions drive development.
Interactions drive development. Thank you, Dr. Ring. Who or what inspires you in your work?
Okay, so I'm going to combine who and what here in my response. So I was actually delighted when you asked this question, and we had talked about this question previously. And I suppose I thought James Heckman, who is, as you know, the American Nobel Prize economist, and the philosophy underpinning the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education that was developed in Reggio Emilia in northern Italy. Now, you might say to me, what have economics and pedagogy to do with each other? And while they might seem light years apart, in early childhood education, we can see that they're inextricably linked. And we know, because James Heckman has figured this out, if we invest in excellence in early childhood education through remunerating our early childhood workforce appropriately and committing to developing their knowledge, skills, and competences through cultivating a pedagogy of excellence, then we have a better chance of realizing human potential and creating a more equitable society. One of my favorite quotations from James Heckman that I've written down for this interview is from his paper, The Economics of Equality, The Early Childhood Educator, which was published in spring 2011 in the American Educator. And he says, "This is why I have not focused my work on the moral aspects of providing equity through early childhood education, even though the case for early intervention could be framed this way. I've focused on its practical value, why it makes sense, and how it generates 7 to 10 cents per year on every initial dollar invested." And look, we all know that policymakers will listen to economists. So I really believe that James Heckman, here in Ireland, the Heckman equation is something that policymakers are very familiar with. And it's very powerful as we advocate for more resources and more support for the early childhood space. Now I'll go on to my Reggio Emilia. So we all know the story, and everyone loves a great story. And in Ireland, people especially love stories. And in Italy, people love stories. So we have that in common culturally. So we all know the story of how Reggio children began, a story that has resonance now actually for our time as well. Whoever thought when we'd come out of a pandemic that in Europe we would have a war, that we're seeing the effects of here in terms of we have up to 60,000 Ukrainian people living here in Ireland at the moment. So in Reggio Emilia, in northern Italy, after World War II, we know that Mussolini left his army tanks behind. And we know the fathers wanted to sell the tanks to build a theatre, and the mothers to build an early childhood setting, because they believed that children should never again have to experience the devastation of war. And here we are again. But anyway, do we learn? Anyway, Loris Malaguzzi, as we know, was a teacher from a nearby village. So he was passing on his bicycle as this building of the early childhood setting was going on, and he stopped to see what was going on, and the rest, as we know, is history. So in his wonderful poem, The 100 Languages, the power and potential of early childhood, as well as our responsibility as early childhood educators comes alive for me. And I'm just going to say a few words of it. I won't recite it all, but I love this. The child is made of 100. The child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 thoughts, 100 ways of thinking, of playing, of speaking, 100 always, 100 ways of listening, of marveling, of loving, 100 joys for singing and understanding, 100 worlds to discover, 100 worlds to invent, 100 worlds to dream. The child has 100 languages and 100 more, but they steal 99. And I'm going to let you go follow this up yourself and see the rest of it. But I think it's so powerful for our times. And this is a poem that Loris Malaguzzi himself composed in Italian and was translated by Lilia Gandini, as we know. And I think if we could only listen to this poem and live it every day, both policymakers and early childhood educators, I think we wouldn't have any problems in the world, but that's for another day. So these are my who and my what. What? The Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education, its philosophy, and the work of Loris Malaguzzi and all of those who come after him, and also James Heckman. And can I put it, John Dewey? We've spoken about him already. There you go.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Ring. And that's so neat how you bookended that too with interactions drive development, and then the poetry and the 100 languages and the joy of childhood. And I mean, what a wonderful privilege we have to be able to focus on the early years. What's been the highlight of your career so far?
Yeah, that was actually an easy question. And it was about a little boy I taught many years ago. And at the time, he had been assessed as having a general learning disability. And when he progressed to middle school later, he was assessed as having autism, but I didn't know that at the time when I was teaching him. And I remember doing everything possible to develop, we'll call him Luke's literacy and numeracy. But realistically, while he made progress for Luke in comparison to national norms and standardized tests, his progress was really negligible in the area of literacy and numeracy. So fast forward to just before the COVID pandemic, and I was at a dinner where community achievements were being celebrated, one of them being social farming. So the venue was packed, and I couldn't see who was speaking so eloquently about his experience of social farming, but I did instantly recognize his voice. It was Luke. For me, it simply reinforced my fundamental belief that all of us learn differently, and as educators, it is our responsibility to find out how each child learns best and how he or she can represent that learning. It may not always be by written words or numerals, but it could be by painting, construction, gestures, dance, speaking, or simply silence. In the end, I think, Marissa, it's always about those 100 languages. So for me, that evening, I will never forget. He spoke more eloquently, actually, than some of my undergraduate students might to a crowd in a packed room about the benefits of social farming. So there is a place for everyone, really, and our responsibility as educators is to find that place. And it can be difficult because we have all of the external accountability agenda that we all have to deal with, the standardization, the accountability, and all of that. But I think we have to continue to advocate for our children and for each child, because for me, that was really, I suppose, a very special moment and the most special moment in my whole career, I have to say.
Oh, wow. I got goosebumps hearing about that. Oh, that's beautiful. And he changed your life and you changed his life.
Well, thank you. I hope, yeah, he did change my life, actually, because my first master's that I did while teaching Luke, because I had done the diploma in special education, as I said, and I was teaching Luke at the time, and I really felt that I needed to kind of interrogate more. It was integration, we were calling it at the time, before it became inclusion. As we know, integration is about where we expect the child to fit into the setting, whereas we have moved on to inclusion, where we expect that we all adapt in a universal manner to all children. So Luke was it was a rural school, and there were no supports for Luke really, other than me, and I think that and the other teachers in the school, of course, and his family. But I suppose he was the child really who kind of prompted me to go on this journey, because I just felt that I needed to be able to support him, and I didn't think I had enough I suppose competence to do that at the time, without further interrogating what my pedagogy in essence was, how powerful it was, and was it responsive to his needs. But he has it's a great story, it really is. And I actually have a photograph of both of us taken on that night that I'm very proud of as well. And actually, I'm going to show it to you. Just wait for me one moment. I will be back here in my office. Here in my office, I actually I have his photo when I was teaching him a long time ago with his two other classmates. So
which one is Luke? The one on the bottom right?
The one, no, Luke is kind of up, he's up here, right here. Yeah. So this is on my desk all of the time. So yeah. So he is truly my inspiration.
Oh, that is beautiful. And I love how you surround yourself in your office with things that inspire you and people. And Luke is one of the highlights of your career. And that's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Marissa. Well, I learned so much from him. I'm actually indebted to him, really indebted to him.
That is beautiful. Well, and you talked about the 100 languages, and when we met last spring for the Dewey project kickoff, you welcomed everyone in your native language. And do you want to say something in your beautiful Irish, and not Irish, but your beautiful native language that can sum up what our time today?
Well, I would be delighted, absolutely delighted to do that. So, tá an áthas an bheith an seo live, bheith an seo leat agus live inmh, agus bhain mé an tanmh as a bheith ag play cuasaí lua I dachais agus cuasaí I dachais live an Tránóna, because an Tránóna tá an seo a gcuine inis, agus tá ag tanú go mór le dul go Nebraska Oregon agus búla live. So just that's simply to say, I just want to thank you all. It has been just a pleasure to be here and have this conversation with you all this evening, because it's this evening here in Ireland. And I am looking forward very much, hopefully in the future, to visiting you in Nebraska, and hopefully, Marisa, to welcoming you here to Ireland also in the future. It has really, truly been my pleasure. Goraibh míle maith agat. And actually, just to go for the Italian-Irish link again, Goraibh míle maith agat means 1,000 thank yous. That's how we say thank you. In English, you say thank you. In Irish, you say Goraibh míle maith agat, which means 1,000 thanks to you. And in Italian, you'd say grazie mille, which is 1,000 thanks as well. So I think probably we are culturally, we are certainly connected in terms of our language and in terms of our philosophy and our pedagogy, I think.
Yes. Thank you so much. Beautiful. Yeah. We are connected. And how can Buttercup listeners follow you?
So I'm afraid I'm not a social media enthusiast for lots of reasons we're not going to go into now, but we do have a Twitter account here in our faculty where you can keep in touch with all of our activities, and I do feature from time to time on that. So it's at MIC is Mary Immaculate College, so it's just at MIC Education Fac at MIC Education Fac. If you go on Twitter, you'll find what's going on here in the college. So please do follow us. We have quite a lot of followers. We're always up to something. So yeah, delighted if you do that.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Ring. I'm so excited to see you next summer. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have loved every second of this, and I'm so grateful that I have gotten to know you in these past couple of years with our assessment project and inclusion and all of the work. And I am so excited to read about the 100 years of special education in Ireland. I'm so excited to learn more about how our two countries have experienced special education in similar and in different ways too. So thank you so much for all your work, and I'm looking forward to our next visit.
Okay, lovely, Marisa. Goodbye for now, and we talk again.
Thank you, Emer.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.